The number one rule when listening to comprehensible input is follow the message. Follow what the person is actually trying to say. Don't focus on the words, focus on the message. But hold on, how can you follow the message of the language without focusing on the words? The words are what makes the message understandable, and if we're listening to an audiobook or a podcast, there's nothing but words. All there is words. So isn't it a contradiction to tell somebody to focus on the message, but don't focus on the words? I think this is one of the most confusing and unintuitive problems that input-based language learners face. But it's not a contradiction. The reason this confuses people stems from hidden assumptions we have about what language learning actually is. In this video, I'm going to give you a mental model to make this click, and once you have it, the contradiction is going to disappear. What's going on, guys? My name's Nick. I'm the creator of Lengualytics and a fluent speaker of the Spanish language. I'm going to put two versions of the exact same image on the screen, and I want you to tell me which you think is clearer. One image is low resolution. The whole thing is there, it's just blurry. The other is high resolution in certain patches, but completely misses other parts. Why is it so much easier to understand the picture on the left? It's because on the left, our brain gets the message, and on the right, our brain does not. When people hear focus, they think of a microscope. They think on zooming really far in to get very high resolution of certain pieces. But when we talk about focus in the context of comprehensible input, we mean something different. We don't mean focus like a microscope, we mean focus like a camera. When you focus a camera, everything in the frame sharpens together. The house, the sky, the yard, all of it comes into clarity at once. That's what focus means in the context of comprehensible input. You're not zeroing in on one word and losing the rest. You're using everything, the narrative, your understanding of the speaker, the context of what's already been said to get an approximation of what's happening. And notice I said approximation, because no matter if you're a beginner or an advanced learner, you're never going to get a fully clear picture. If you're doing comprehensible input, then you're consistently challenging yourself. And that means that every image you get is always going to be a little blurry. But as the blurry house picture shows you, a blurry image is usually still perfectly comprehensible. Your brain doesn't need perfect resolution to understand what it's looking at. It just needs enough. The moment you switch to microscope focus, where you lock on to every single thing you see and try to get perfect clarity before you move on, you lose the full picture as a consequence. You sacrifice an understanding of the full image for a really high resolution set of pixels. And a perfectly clear set of pixels are very satisfying for your conscious mind that always wants to feel like it perfectly understands. But it's deeply unsatisfying for the part of your brain that's responsible for actually acquiring the language. The part of your brain that's responsible for acquisition is the same part of your brain that looks at a blurry picture of a house and is 100% satisfied to tell you that's a house, without any doubt. And I'm begging a question there. Why don't you have doubts about what that image is? How does your brain understand a blurry picture in the first place? You've never seen a blurry house. Houses aren't blurry in real life. So how does your brain look at that smeared, low-resolution image and immediately know what it is? Because your brain isn't processing pixel by pixel. It's processing based on all the input it's already taken in. So instead of studying each pixel it sees carefully, it simply pattern matches. We don't need to have seen a blurry house to know a blurry house is a blurry house. All we have to do is see thousands of non-blurry houses, and through that catalog of input, our brain notices patterns. We don't store 1,000 images of houses like a photo database in our brains, ready to compare pixel by pixel. Instead, we store the patterns that make a house. The rough shape of the roof, the way windows sit in walls, the proportion of the door. None of that needs to be crisp to be recognizable. So when the blurry image hits, your brain isn't flipping through stored photos looking for a match. It's matching the rough shapes of the image against an abstract pattern. We're not asking, does this image match a house I've already seen? We're asking, is this image an example of houseness? When we're listening to a language, we often feel like all we're doing is learning the meaning of words, but that's not primarily what we're doing. What we're really doing is associating words with context at an unconscious level to build up the patterns that help us understand the language. Think about what happens when you look at a blurry image and there's a part you genuinely can't make out. How do you resolve it? You don't stare harder at a single part, you look at everything around it. If the rest of the image is a lively coffee shop, the sign on the window almost certainly says open. The context pours meaning into the unclear part. That's exactly what happens when you follow the message in your target language. When a word goes by that you don't fully understand, the narrative around it, the story, the speaker, the place, the emotions, pour meaning into that word. The context pours into what you don't understand, and by that mechanism makes what's incomprehensible more comprehensible the next time you encounter it. So focus on the message, not the words, is not a contradiction. It's an instruction manual for allowing your brain to construct patterns. The message is the context, and the context is what pours meaning into everything that sits inside it. And this is why microscope focus is so destructive to the process. Microscope focus treats context as something distracting. With that philosophy, we need to cut out the context so we can focus. Focus on what really matters, usually the words, grammar, and structures. But when we cut out context, we don't answer the questions that our brain actually cares about for real-time comprehension. What usually comes before this word? What usually comes after? Who usually says this word? In what situations is the word usually said? What do people look like when they use this word? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they energetic? All of these questions are what the brain really cares about, because the brain isn't really interested in building a label to meaning lookup system. It's interested in creating a relational model that can predict what someone means before the conscious mind even has time to think. Read these questions again. What you'll notice with all of them is that they're all relational questions. They're not about individual words. They're about how words relate to each other and how words relate to other concepts. This is why I say your brain is constructing a relational model. Your brain is interested in patterns. Patterns are fundamentally relational, so it necessarily follows that your brain would store this information in a network of associations. And that's why you see me using these neural network relational model graphics in every video. So here's the mental model you can use when consuming input. Don't focus like a microscope, focus like a camera. You're trying to bring up the resolution of the entire message. So that way everything you understand can pour into the stuff you don't understand to gradually increase the comprehensibility of what you're consuming. But I know what you guys are thinking. This is a very high-level, abstract model that leaves a bunch of practical questions on the table. I think I have a good idea of what those practical questions are, so I'm going to answer them now. The first question that came to my mind as I wrote this is, what does this mean for direct translations? A translation feels like a microscope move. It feels like the tool that gives you perfect clarity. So if I'm telling you to stop chasing microscopic clarity, am I necessarily telling you to throw out direct translations? No. But we do have to be honest about what translations actually do for you, because they do not give you perfect clarity. A word in your native language is almost never an exact match of a word from a different language. It's an approximation, a rough stand-in that gets you close. It's a helpful association that can give you a really quick functional understanding of a word. And in that way, it's just like very, very powerful context. And that understanding should affect how you use it. You shouldn't be trying to weld on direct translations to words in your target language through drilling. Instead, you let it sit in the background as helpful context. You use it as a tool to understand the message. The best way to think about direct translation is as a confidence builder. They're not teaching you what the word really is. They're simply keeping the message clear enough for you to make sense of. I often tell the story of when I was an absolute beginner. I would do those exercises where you do, a video with English subtitles, then Spanish subtitles, and then no subtitles, and you do that repeatedly until, you could understand the entire video without subtitles at all. And when I was doing that, at the end of like 20, 30 times watching these videos, I would assume, oh, well, I have perfect comprehension, obviously. There's nothing I could possibly be missing at this point. I have all the direct translations. However, when I came back to those same videos with 600 more hours of Spanish, I realized instantly how much more rich my understanding had become. Translations give you a foothold, but they're not the silver bullets that beginners think they are. The second concern is also very practical. You say, Nick, I'm a human being. I do not feel like a pattern recognition machine. I require some level of clarity to feel like I'm understanding what I'm listening to. My answer to that is yes, you do require a certain level of clarity when you're listening to input. But your brain is actually capable of understanding with a lot less clarity than you'd think. I find that you can take out like 60% of the words of any English sentence and still understand what's being said basically perfectly fine. And that doesn't mean that we're just not going to care about 40% of the words we see. My point is that you can start from a very low resolution and work your way up. Input doesn't have to be 95% comprehensible for you to get value out of it. The issue is, as monolingual adults, we're just so used to having perfect clarity in almost every message we consume. And because we've operated with perfect clarity for so long, anything a little bit lower than that just throws us off. Following the camera model of focus asks something uncomfortable of you. It asks you to be comfortable with that blur, and being comfortable with that blur takes practice. I would think about this as relearning a skill. Watching comprehensible input requires you to relearn something you lost as an adult. You've lost the tolerance for ambiguity you had as a child, and gaining that back is one of the most important things you need for real-time comprehension of a foreign language. And the only way to build it is watch a ton of comprehensible input and learn to just let things slip past you when they're not that important to the message. Letting yourself not need a direct translation for every single little thing. Allowing some concepts to simply be fuzzy. The more you do this, the more you'll be able to focus on the message. The final concern I want to address is speaking. People are going to say, well, how is this method going to get me to speak? To speak, you can't approximate words. You can't say half a word or a blurry version of a word, and you have to choose a grammatical tense. You have to stay in past tense, stay in present tense. And if you're just approximating, what are you going to do? Approximate tenses? And yes, I agree. Speaking requires a very high resolution that input can take a very long time to deliver. Speaking does benefit a lot more from having conscious knowledge. But the way I'm treating this is that concern is just out of the scope of this video. All I'm talking about in this video is how to get a deep, implicit, real-time understanding of the language. And when we're trying to understand the language, it's really inconsequential that we can't speak it. You'd be surprised at the amount of language you can follow without understanding why or how you can understand it. I can understand intermediate Portuguese and Italian comprehensible input videos even though I can't speak a single full sentence in those languages. And that's come completely simply from my time listening to Spanish. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is the idea that the ability to speak a language proves a deep understanding of that language. But the reality is you can get dramatically better at speaking a language without deepening your understanding of that language at all. If you don't believe me, I did an entire video on that right here. I'm going to link that as the end screen. If you're interested, check it out. Otherwise, I will see you in another video.